My core
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name for the court, please.
David Diamond,
And how are you employed, sir?
at the University of South Florida. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology.
Okay, and how long have you been so employed?
Almost 30 years.
Okay. And could you tell us your education, training, and experience in the field of psychology or what other specialties that you may have?
I received an undergraduate degree in biology from the University of California, Irvine, and a PhD also in biology with a specialty in neurobiology of memory, also from University of California, Irvine at the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory. I had a postdoc at the Department of Pharmacology at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, and ever since then I've been a professor in psychology at the University of South Florida.
Okay. All right. And what is your specialty, if any, sir?
My primary specialty is the study of the brain and memory.
Okay.
May I add that I've also been a career scientist at the Veterans Affairs Department for 30 years, with my specialty being post-traumatic stress disorder, which is fundamentally a memory disorder.
Okay. Can you give us a summary of your contributions to science?
So I have primarily studied all different aspects of the brain and memory. I've studied how people are affected by trauma and develop post-traumatic stress disorder. I've studied how the mechanisms of memory are affected in both animals and people. I've published work on memory in animals and clinical studies on people. And so more recently, I've been studying the phenomenon the last couple of decades on how children are forgotten in cars.
And have you ever testified in court regarding memory issues and or children left in cars issues?
Yes, I've testified numerous times in different states, in criminal trials, civil trials as well, as a result of children being forgotten in cars.
Okay, can you tell us how many different states you've testified in with regard to that?
As I recall, 5 or 6 different states in which I've testified specifically in criminal trials.
Okay. And also other countries?
Yes, I've also testified on a case in 2 cases in Australia, one involving a child that was forgotten by a mother in Australia.
Okay. And how long have you been studying about, we'll say, the issue of memory and how it may affect children being left in cars?
So I do remember very well when I began studying this. It was about 20 years ago when I'd already been studying memory for decades, and I received a call from someone, a news reporter, asking me as a memory expert to explain how it is that so many hundreds of children have died as a result of being forgotten in cars. And I will admit at the time, the fact that I understood all about memory, and in fact I studied forgetting. I had no idea what the reporter was referring to. But as a scientist and also as a parent, I was very curious. So I then started doing research on my own. And I found websites, kidsincars.org and noheatstroke.org, where they had been keeping track of children that had been forgotten in cars. And I learned that hundreds, this is 20 years ago, at the time, hundreds of children had died as a result of being left and forgotten in cars. They had died of heat stroke. That's therefore how I began my study, was to appreciate the numbers, which were staggering. I learned that the children that now are being forgotten in cars, it was largely unheard of. It hadn't happened prior to the development of airbags. So before there were airbags in cars in the 1990s, children in general were put in the front seat. And so you're not forgetting a child that's immediately next to you. Once children were put in the back seat, in particular facing the rear, when you have infants in the back seat, then you start seeing people forgetting kids in cars. So there's first an obvious pattern that we see, which is children are forgotten in cars beginning in the late 1990s. And what we have now is an epidemic. Last year, 39 children were forgotten and died in hot cars.
How many?
39 children were forgotten that died in hot cars. So we've had hundreds of
Could you
children.
hang on just a minute? I apologize, Dr. Diamond. I misheard something.
So what I do as a part of my research is to monitor the number of children, and the way I do this also is that I'm on task forces that keep track of children that are forgotten and die in cars. I'm on a task force in Florida because of the heat we have in Florida. We have a very high percentage of children that die in hot cars. I'm also on a task force in Texas where they have children, a very high percentage, but actually almost every state in the country, children have died in hot cars. I'm also on an international task force funded by the United Nations because children have died in hot cars all around the world. So we're looking to combat this epidemic of children dying in hot cars.
Have you been published?
So I have an online article in which I have described the neurobiology of what is going on when children are forgotten in cars. And this is a result of the way I do the research. So I personally interview dozens of parents, caretakers, and grandparents that have forgotten children in cars. I read the literature, I read the media reports as to what is going on, as to what is happening when a person is forgotten, when a child is forgotten in cars. So initially, I wrote an online article to explain this, which is an academic online journal called The Conversation. And that article has had over 150,000 views. I then evaluated the literature, the neuroscience.
Please. Okay, everyone have a seat. You can keep going, but we have a verdict, your choice. You all can have a seat.
If I can do this after the verdict,
That's entirely up to you, yes.
As I was saying, as a neuroscientist, one who has studied memory all my career, I then evaluated the neurobiology of children being forgotten in cars. And so I published a paper in a hybrid medical legal journal with the help of a law professor, Medicine, Science, and the Law. This is a peer-reviewed medical journal in which I described the medical basis of how it is that people can forget children in cars. And this specifically, I want to emphasize, this is for people who are not on medication. I understand that in this case, we have an issue about medication affecting Tracy Nix's memory, and that's certainly valid. But independent of medication, we have hundreds of people who have forgotten children in cars, and that is independent of medication impairing their memory. And this was a part of my publication in Medicine, Science, and the Law.
you indicated you've written some publications. Can you tell us, or do you recall what states you've been a witness in with respect to the issue of children in cars, being left in cars?
Off the top of my head, I've testified as an expert in Texas, Wyoming, Arkansas, and a couple of other states,
Virginia?
and Virginia.
Okay. Have you also consulted with prosecutors regarding this issue?
Yes, I've not only been contacted by defense attorneys, I've been contacted by prosecutors. One in particular, this happened numerous times, so one in particular was a prosecutor in Utah in which a mother forgot a child in the car and the child died. That prosecutor contacted me, telling me that he was considering charging her with a crime, with manslaughter, but he wanted my opinion as to how to go about this. Did I actually consider, well, in his opinion, is this a crime? And we spoke for a good long time. We spoke for about an hour, and I explained to him the neurobiology of this phenomenon. I explained to him and shared all the research that had shown how many hundreds of children had died to really good, attentive, and loving parents, that this is not happening to reckless people. And at the end of our conversation, he decided not to charge her with a crime. And what I was really pleased with was he actually put out a press release which included his discussion with me as an explanation for why he was not charging her with a crime.
All right, let me go ahead now. We're going to break this. I'm going to
Yes,
put
sir.
the verdict in. I
Yes,
just got my laptop, which I needed to have the verdict come in with. State, would you just
No, Your Honor, I was just about to say, I didn't know if I heard the court correctly, but we have a verdict, so I was
We
asking.
do have a verdict, and sir, you need to step down. Once we're done with the trial, whichever way it goes, you can have the courtroom and the court reporter. So sir, please step down. All right, Judge Lewis, we're ready for the jury.